It's going to make a really quick financial video. And the reason why I'm making this video is it's to basically inform people of how garnishment works. Now, I was once garnished because when I was in college, and I've told this story before because there's no shame in my game. Discover card. I had a Discover card. I think I also had I think it was American Express, and I think I also had probably a Visa, and I had a MasterCard. Scary thing about being a kid when you enter college and you turn 18 is that right away they start signing you up for credit cards. They have a table right there next to the financial aid office. Before you know it, you've signed up for credit cards. And that's assuming you're not a new age Generation Z kid whose parents already got them a credit card. Most smart parents would get their kids a debit card. But anyway, the bottom line is I ran up money on that Discover card. I think I had even paid for part of my school supplies using that Discover card. I owed $5,000. State law varies. So if you lose a judgment against you for your wages and a credit card company or child support or whatever it is sues you, if they win, which most likely they will, they can garnish wages from you. Now, I was losing 10% of my paycheck. But of course, this was once I graduated college. That was back in 2006. So I was getting I was getting 10% of my money taken away. And before you even get your check, they garnish you based on your Social Security. So basically, if you're the type of person who gets paid under the table, you don't necessarily have to worry about garnishment. But at that point, you have to worry about the IRS because the IRS is looking to see how can you sustain yourself if you're not working. And if you're working off the books, the IRS is coming after you. Especially now that the Biden administration's hired like 80-something thousand IRS agents and they're buying up guns and bullets, which means that they're basically becoming a freaking army at this point. So at any event, Fool.com, MotleyFool.com, had a little breakdown of states protecting people from garnishment. And I thought that I'd mention it because of the Tasha K, Cardi B situation where apparently Tasha K was running her stupid mouth and Cardi B shut it with a lawsuit. So long story short, some of you pay attention to Tasha K. I don't. Some of you pay attention to Cardi B. I don't. So I don't really know much more about it beyond what I heard about it in the news. So I believe somebody mentioned to me that Tasha K had moved from one state to another. So my guess is the reason why she moved was because she knew that that was the only way to avoid high garnishment on the lawsuit. Chances are, if she was in a state that had low garnishment allowances and didn't allow a large percentage of her check to get taken away, chances are she probably would have stayed wherever she was. So you can check that in the background. You can look that up because I honestly don't give a fuck. I'm just doing this because I want to talk to people about garnishment. I don't give a shit if Cardi B pulls Tasha K's spine out. To me, that means nothing to me. I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to roll on my side like Donald Duck, and I'm going to have a nice sound sleep. I don't give a shit what Cardi B does to Tasha K. She ran her stupid mouth, and now Cardi B shut her stupid mouth. So I could care less. So you could find out what the state garnishment was that she came from and what the state garnishment allowances is that she went to. I don't give a fuck. I'm not even going to bother looking it up. But I want you to understand, this is one of the reasons why you can't run from the credit card agencies. This is another reason why you can't run from child support. They have your Social Security number. They know who you are. They're coming to get that wallet. So my thing is, make sure you don't put yourself in a position where you can be garnished. Because if you do, they get your money before you get your money. So it's not a great situation. So anyway, basically, yeah, they're talking about the chunk that gets taken out of your paycheck. Now, here in New York State, when I was garnished, and this was years ago, this is 2006, the allowance was 10%. So that means that they couldn't take more than 10% out of my check. So 10% of whatever I was making back then, that was getting snatched until the bill was paid off. One thing you got to remember is if you default for, let's say, $5,000, they're also adding court fees, and they're also adding whatever late charges. They're also adding whatever finance charges, whatever it is. When you get hit with whatever that final garnishment is, you're paying that entire amount, and it's coming right out of your check. At that point, if you've ignored the courts and you've ignored the lawsuits and everything, they're coming after you, and there's nothing you can do. So here are some, I'm going to leave a link to this so you can read this thing yourself, but here's a couple of states that try to work to protect citizens. Alabama, they have $1,000 per paycheck or the first 75% of disposable earnings. Whichever is greater is exempt from wage garnishment. Alaska, $473 a week. They say $743 per week if the debtor's earnings alone support their household, or the first 75% of disposable earnings, whichever is greater, is exempt from wage garnishment. Alaska only has less than 700,000 people in it. Alaska is an oil welfare state, despite the fact that it's a red state. Sarah Palin came from it. But basically, Alaska is held afloat by oil subsidies. The reality is nobody wants to live there. The only people who move to Alaska are hiding, for the most part. They're probably hiding from the authorities here in America. Alaska and Canada are really good for that. That's why we have to have strict immigration laws up there. So anyway, Arizona follows federal wage garnishment guidelines. God knows what that is, because the federal government will fuck you harder than anybody else will. Arkansas follows federal wage garnishment guidelines unless the debtor is a laborer or mechanic, in which case 60 days of wages are exempt. Okay, so they have special love for laborers or mechanics. 60 days of wages are exempt. After that, the first $25 earned per week is also exempt. California, 75% of disposable earnings or 40 times the state's minimum wage, whichever is greater, is exempt from wage garnishment. I guess they understand in California that because the liberals have done such a job destroying that place, that chances are if you get garnished, you're not going to be able to pay your bills. So I guess they give you just enough to stay alive. But then again, suicide rates have been going up, so maybe that's not true either. Colorado follows federal wage garnishment guidelines through September 30, 2020 for garnishments issued on or after October 1st, 2020, 80% of disposable earnings, or 40 times the federal or state minimum wage, whichever is greater, is exempt from wage garnishment. Connecticut, 75% of disposable earnings, or 40 times the federal or state minimum wage, is exempt from wage garnishment. Delaware has always been known as a place for people to run and hide especially if they get hit with a divorce and they get hit with child support. If you're here in New York City and your wife decides that she's going to leave your ass, divorce you, and start fucking her coworker, well, guess what? Delaware is the place you run and hide. So they say 85% of disposable earnings, or 30 times the federal minimum wage, is exempt from wage garnishment. District of Columbia, D.C., 75%. Wage garnishment is suspended effective March 2020. So basically, this is because of the pandemic. So this is actually a slightly older article. So, if you were worried about this happening to you because of student loans that you're not paying on time, or if you're worried about something else that you might get garnished on, you might want to check your state laws about garnishment. Florida follows federal wage garnishment guidelines. Georgia follows federal wage. Hawaii, wage garnishment calculation. Now, Hawaii, they make a lot of money. So I would expect Hawaii to be slightly, what does it say? It says allows creditors to garnish 5% of the first 100 in disposable income per month, 10% of the next 100 per month, and 20% of all sums in excess of 200 per month. If this amount is greater than the amount that would be garnished under the federal guidelines, then the federal guidelines must be used. Idaho follows federal wage. So basically what it is, and I'm guessing this is because you're noticing that they keep saying federal wage garnishment guidelines. There are usury laws when it comes to credit where a credit card agency is not allowed to charge you 30%. Like, for instance, you'll never see 30% APR. You'll see 28.99. You'll see 29.88. You'll see 27.98. But you'll never really see 30%. Usury laws don't allow them to do that. Now, that all goes out the window when you're talking about payday lenders and when you're talking about loan sharks. But for the most part, the federal government they've set it up so that you can't get garnished beyond a certain point, or I guess beyond the point where you'd be able to live. Illinois, 85% of disposable earnings. Wage garnishment is suspended on 2020. Yeah, that's COVID. Indiana follows federal wage garnishment guidelines. Iowa, the maximum. Now, Iowa's got, as you can see, Iowa goes by your income. So they say if you earn 50,000 above, 10% is where they stop. 10%. That's pretty much. That's probably what New York says. Kansas follows federal wage garnishment guidelines. Kentucky follows federal wage garnishment guidelines. Louisiana follows federal wage garnishment guidelines. You may wonder why I'm reading all of these, because there's a possibility that I have people who are blind who listen to me just to listen to me. So I'm reading it out just for the blind, so you can consider this handicap accessibility. Okay. Maine, 75% of disposable earnings, or 40 times the federal or state minimum wage, whichever is greater, is exempt. Maryland follows federal wage. Massachusetts, 85%. New wage garnishments can't be initiated until 90 days after the state of emergency. Yeah, so basically, if there's a state of emergency, they don't bother. Michigan follows federal wage garnishment guidelines. Minnesota, 75%. Wage garnishment was suspended for 2020. COVID, again. Mississippi, first 30 days of wages after the garnishment order is served are exempt from wage garnishment. So they're basically giving you a month to catch up. So if you get served today, the 30 days after that, you're exempt. And then after that, you're fucked. Okay, Missouri follows federal wage, and it says, except when the debtor is the head of the household, in which case 90% of disposable income with 30 times the federal minimum wage is exempt from wage garnishment. So again, some of these states know that they got to collect these taxes. They got to get you to pay your mortgage. So they will not allow you to get garnished beyond the point where you really, really can't make your payments. Montana follows federal wage garnishment guidelines. Nebraska follows federal wage garnishment guidelines. 85% of disposable income, if you're the head of household, is exempt from wage garnishment. Thank goodness for them. Nevada, the greater of the following amounts. Now, see, Nevada got to start some shit. So what does it say? 50 times the federal minimum wage, 75% of disposable earnings, 82% of disposable earnings, and this is based on if your income your weekly wage income is $770 or less. So if you're making less than $770, they're protecting you if that's all you make per week. 770 is the magic number. And then they suspended it for COVID. New Hampshire, 75% of disposable earnings or 50 times the federal minimum wage, whichever is greater, is exempt. New Jersey, 90% of your income. So New Jersey has such high property taxes that they have to make sure that they can't let you fall too far, because if you can't pay them taxes, then they start having problems, collecting the tax, collecting property tax, so forth and so on. New Mexico, 75% of disposable earnings or 40 times the federal minimum wage. New York, the greater of the following amounts is exempt. 90% of the debtor's gross income, 75% of the debtor's disposable earnings, 30 times the federal minimum wage is exempt from wage garnishment. The greater of the following amounts. I was expecting it to just say 10%, but of course it's New York, so they got to do something to differentiate themselves, don't they? Okay, and so forth and so on. It keeps on going. And basically, who's last? Wisconsin, 80% of disposable earnings. Most of this is really based on the federal minimum wage guidelines. There are some states that go the extra mile. And then they say, how do you protect yourself from wage garnishment? Check your laws and exemptions in your state. Try to settle the debt with the creditor. I actually did that because, see, when I was in college, when I had graduated, what I did was, now, see, some people would have just let their student loans rot and they would have just kept paying the minimum or ignored them for a very long time. What I did was I settled with the creditor, and I actually took out a student loan to pay them back. Now, most people would say that's stupid, but what I did was, because the interest rates on the credit cards were so much higher than the interest rates on the deferred student loan, what I decided to do was I said, okay, I'll take out the student loan, pay off the creditors. That'll end the harassing phone calls. That'll end the threats against my credit. And that'll allow me to start rebuilding my credit. So it's kind of like borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, because Peter's interest rate is only 3% and Paul's is like 30. So what I did was I borrowed from Peter to pay Paul to consolidate, and then I stopped spending on credit and I started rebuilding my credit at that point because I had gotten a job and I started paying towards my credit. And now here I sit many years later in 2022 with 850 credit scores across the board. So how about that? It worked. Okay. Object to garnishment. So you can go to court and you can say, yeah, Your Honor, I can't, please, Your Honor, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Okay. File bankruptcy. You should never file bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is an emotional act. That's something you do because you see no other way out. The best way to deal with things, if it gets so bad that you got to file bankruptcy, is you find somebody who's a reputable credit repair, or you try to settle your accounts yourself with these creditors. And if you do that, especially considering what we went through with COVID, anybody who was in danger of bankruptcy and was really fucked up, COVID was the perfect time for them to settle their debts and to say, okay, I'll pay you this, I'll pay you that. Now, if you were homeless and you were also jobless, well, chances are you're not making that call. But that was really the perfect time. And unfortunately, COVID has basically ended. And once this November election is over, you can bet that people forget COVID ever existed, because around here, people don't even wear masks. You're like, you'd never think anything ever happened. But anyway, consumers are on their own in most states. In total, 10 states and Washington, D.C. have either suspended wage garnishments or blocked new wage garnishment. Now, this is all talking about COVID, because this article, like way back when we actually had a problem with COVID, this article was written June 24, 2020. And because of that, their outlook on the world is a lot different than mine in 2022. So that's basically that. If, again, the best things you can do is check your local laws, and if possible, settle your debts and say, this is what I'm going to pay you, and make a debt settlement. Or if it really comes down to it, go to court and fight the judge and say, listen, Your Honor, I can't do it, and blah, 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 blah. So that's the best possible thing you can do. Now, as for Tasha K, well, Tasha K, you basically just got hit with child support payments, because no matter what state you move to, America's looking for that money, and they're going to garnish you. Once that lawsuit comes down, Tasha K, you're getting garnished. Now, if I were you, Tasha K, what I'd probably do is shut my fucking mouth, and I'd probably suspend my YouTube account, or I'd just let it sit there and collect, what is it called? I'd let it collect my, ghost income, or whatever you want to call it, residuals, my royalties. See, that's the beautiful thing about YouTube. If I stopped making videos right now, I'd still have over $2,000 a month coming in, because I have so many videos. I have so much residual. Shit, I made 50 videos alone in the month of August. 50 videos, man. I made 50 boom clot videos, man. But anyway, Tasha K, yeah. Thank you from Cardi B. I want to thank you. If I was Cardi B, I just want to thank you for buying me a new Bugatti. And I want to thank you for buying me a new Aventador. And I want to thank you for buying me a new cheap house. Thanks a lot.